right and left, and this is the part y'all are going to work on. So one do one slide, one do the other. Go.
Okay.
Ready?
Are we already videoing?
Yeah, you're videoing.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Hannah, this is you. Go. Hey, guys.
What was the Enlightenment?
The era known historically as the Enlightenment marks as an intellectual beginning of the modern world. Ideas originating in this era would gradually spread more, creating challenges in existing traditions of way of governing. Many governments today have Enlightenment principles as the basis of their constitutions and forms of government. In addition, the expansion of suffrage to women, blacks, and people of all classes is a legacy to the Enlightenment. Enlightenment ideas on equality also helped in the dominance of social elites such as aristocracy and the church. Enlightenment thoughts also led many countries to establish systems of public schools and put an end to the idea of education that was only a privilege to upper classes.
And that's it, and then explain it in my summary.
What is Enlightenment?
When historians discuss the Enlightenment, they usually are referring to the 18th century Europe, France and England in particular. Although other parts of the world, including the U.S., are often included as well, the Enlightenment was a period of intellectual ferment that gave rise to a range of new theories about society, government, philosophy, economics, and religion. The period produced more than just abstract theorizing. However, it offered a whole new way of conceptualizing. Say it, Aria.
Say what?
So
that way.
I did my art because
Conceptualizing?
The world in one's modern era as... Wait, I skipped along.
In many ways,
this change in perception marked the beginning of the modern era, and as institutions of traditions of the past begin to shift and even crumble in the face of new ideas and approaches.
It won't do it, I tried.
Scientific
It
revolution.
only goes to that
This is me.
slide.
The term Enlightenment was first coined by an Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher. Blah blah means dare to know in Latin. Kant also wrote in this essay, all that is required for this enlightenment is freedom, and particularly the least harmful of all that is in matters. In other words, in order to be enlightened, a person had to think independently rather than simply following society's customs and traditions. Thus, the Enlightenment encouraged free thought, or at least freer and more wide-ranging thought than had occurred in the recent past.
Francis Bacon and the scientific method. The most important factor of the development was the Enlightenment. Of the Enlightenment was the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th century. That's what it says. Ready?
We're not reading anything. We know this, Hannah.
Yeah.
Francis Bacon and the scientific method.
Part 2.
Sir Francis Bacon led the theoretical groundwork for what became known as the scientific method. In Europe, science had been almost a combination of magic and academics, and scientists were not concerned with the careful practices, methodical actions, logic, or theory. Bacon believed that all scientific research should rely on careful observation and experimentation, rather than simply relying on one's own thought and reasoning, as earlier scientific thinkers had. The data obtained should be then recorded and analyzed according to logic and reason, then used to produce a testable hypothesis.
Ready? Let's go to the next one.
We're pumped.
Oh.
Be sure to read these points, guys.
Yeah.
Don't
These
drop
points?
out. Read them.
Okay, Isaac Newton and the scientific method. Although earlier scientists had already put Bacon ideas into practice, Sir Isaac Newton is the scientist most associated with the scientific method. Oh my gosh. Newton made a range of groundbreaking discoveries. Sorry guys, people are walking by and we look like idiots. Alright, groundbreaking discoveries in fields of mathematics, physics, optics, and more. Newton's achievements Newton's achievements provided the inspiration for the Enlightenment. If scientific method had worked so well for finding scientific truth, perhaps it could be applied to social sciences as well, so that truths about society itself could be discovered.
Don't drop out, guys. Enlightenment Principles. Although earlier scientists had already put Bacon's ideas into practice, Sir Isaac Newton is the scientist most associated with the scientific method. Newton made a range of groundbreaking discoveries in the field of mathematics, physics, optics, and more. Newton's achievements provided the inspiration for the Enlightenment. If the scientific method had worked so well for finding the scientific truth, perhaps it could be applied to social sciences as well, so that the truths about society itself could be discovered. Don't drop out, guys.
I just wrote it down.
What
If we read that, we're sorry already.
Okay, Enlightenment, a meeting of French Enlightenment thinkers. See that photo?
Yeah, you do.
The Enlightenment era was characterized by secularism, challenges to authority,
Secularism, okay.
and glorification of reason. Bullet 1. Many Enlightenment thinkers felt that although they had the great minds of the... Wait, hold on, let me reread that so you guys understand it more. Many Enlightenment thinkers felt that although the great minds of the medieval and Renaissance eras had achieved much, they also had been overly constrained by religion, tradition, and superstition. To truly achieve independent thought, one had to throw off all limits and rely solely on reason. Where am I at? Okay, bullet 2. Number 2. Want to read that?
Okay. Like the pioneers of the scientific revolution, Enlightenment thinkers also strove to make conclusions based on observation, logic, and reason, rather than on faith. Bullet 3. Enlightenment thinkers revived the spirit of the Renaissance queen knowledge. Choosing to focus on. We need you guys to be quiet. It's serious work. The secular approach led to the development of social sciences. Don't drop out, guys. Why are you looking at me? I'm about to shoot you.
Read those bullet points. The Marquis de Condorcet.
Okay.
No, it's Marquis.
Marquis.
Make them do it. They can't pronounce
The
I'll
Marquis.
get one more slide, then someone else gets to work on it.
Hold on.
But can we keep this part of the video?
Yes.
The Marquis was a renowned mathematician who played an active role early on in the French Revolution, leading a redesign of the educational system, and helping to write the first French Constitution when the radicals,
They do just keep going.
Jacobins, took over the revolution. However, he went into hiding. During this time, he wrote the most famous work, Sketch for Historical Picture of Progress of Human Spirit. His book provided clear expression of many Enlightenment ideals, an unbending of faith and reason as the means to discover all truths, continual advancements both in science and in social mores and attitudes, and believe that humans can realistically strive.
Don't drop out, guys.
Marquis de Condorcet.
Stop looking at us. I'm about to shoot you.
Okay.
You know you can't.
Marquis.
Okay, the Marquis.
He felt that just. You need to say that more.
He felt that just as elite scientists and intellectuals can make great discoveries, but people of the ordinary intelligence as well. He therefore favored universal education, seeing that by giving more people the elementary knowledge that you can inspire them with a taste for more advanced study and give them a capacity for making progress in it. And that, therefore,
haven't gotten
the
to
number
half.
of men destined to push
We can go through half.
Okay.
We're not half yet. Okay. Are you ready?
back the frontiers of sciences by the discoveries will grow in the same.
Not like that. Like
Yeah,
that,
we
so
meant to
they
do
can
that,
see.
guys. You know what?
Mr. Allen wants to be a know-it-all, but in reality, we know.
This is the best part of the video you guys are ever gonna watch. The best video he'll ever post
Probably.
because of us.
Are you done?
We're done.
No, wait. No, we're not done, but we're like done with the slide. Are you done with the
Yeah,
slide?
we're done.
Okay. Look. Hey, what are you doing?
See, this part is not what they see. They see this over here. So when you do that, see how that pops up for them? So then they see that, and then you talk that part through.
Okay. Rene Descartes was one of... No!
Not Descartes.
It is Descartes. Okay.
Y'all are just as bad.
No, you look so weird.
Okay, stop
right
talking.
now. Your mouth looks really close to your mouth. Anything up the nose.
Please continue, Ellen. You're doing a wonderful job.
Thank
We're
you.
all at this.
Rene Descartes was one of the most important philosophers and mathematicians of the modern era. In Discourse on Method and the Meditation, he reasoned that all of his prior knowledge was subject to doubt because it was based on traditional beliefs rather than in rational, empirical thought. He pondered what he could honestly say he knew to be true, going so far to doubt whether he was awake or dreaming, or if he even existed. He then began to reconstruct his worldview. He knew that his thoughts existed, which had suggested the existence of a thinking being, himself. Descartes then came to his famous conclusion, cogito ergo sum. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes. I think, therefore I am.
Which means I think, therefore I am. Madame de Pompadour, mistress of King Louis the 15th of France? Is it 15th?
Is it
It's an X and a V.
That's 15, yes.
Yes. Okay. Shut up, you pterodactyl.
Shut up.
Was a devotee of art and philosophy. Around the middle of the 18th century, she began holding what became known as the Salon. Salons were a sort of high-class cocktail party for socialties, aristocracies, aristocrats. Hey, it sounds like aristocats.
That's why they made the movie.
Oh. Intellectuals, where people demonstrated their knowledge of new theories and tried to outwit each other. Madame de Pompadour. Oh, there's a Doctor Who episode with Madame de Pompadour.
There
You
is.
stay on task.
We'll find it. We'll paste a clip from it in there if I got time.
Do it. Held the most famous. Oh wait, Madame de Pompadour held the most famous and best attended salons in Paris. Enlightenment thinkers in France who went to the salons were known as philosophes. That should be a philosopher.
Philosopher.
It says philosophies. It says philosophies.
It's a typo.
Okay. Enlightenment thinkers in France who went to salons were known as philosophers. For a salon to be truly successful, it had to have a philosophy in attendance as a sort of showpiece. Voltaire, 1694 to 1778. So he was like really old.
Yes.
How do you pronounce? Okay, so François Marie Arout, known more famously as Voltaire, was
Just
one
stick
of
with
the
Voltaire.
what?
Just stick with Voltaire.
Voltaire was one of the most renowned of the philosophers. Oh my gosh, you kept putting philosophies. Jeez, Mr. Allen. A prolific writer. A prolific writer. Much of his work either satirized or attacked what he called the relics.
A satire. You know what a satire is? Satiricized. Satirical.
No.
Sarcastic.
Whatever.
He was sarcastic. You'd love his writing. He's just like you.
I have no idea what that means. Much of his work either satirized or attacked what he called the relics of the medieval social order. In particular, the church and the aristocracies, despite or perhaps because of his controversial ideas. He was in high demand at salons, not just in France, but throughout Europe as well. He lived in the court of Frederick the Great for a time, and he was friends with Catherine the Great. I almost said gate. Gay. attacked intolerance in society, politics, and religions. A famous quote, usually attributed to Voltaire, states, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." He felt that all governments were susceptible to tyranny, but he greatly admired the British model. Perhaps the most notable achievement of the philosophers as a group was the 17th volume of Encyclopedie, known in English as Encyclopedia, the rational dictionary of the sciences, the arts, and the crafts. In 1745, French publisher André Le Breton asked writer Denis Diderot to help him translate the seminal English Encyclopedia into French. Diderot
Where is he?
is Diderot.
Where's the
Diderot. No, I'm right here.
Diderot? Yeah.
Okay.
Diderot.
Well, I gotta read that over then.
Diderot served as co-editor.
Diderot served as co-editor of the project along with the mathematician Jean Leronde d'Alembert. D'Alembert.
Jean. I like that name. Jean.
Jean. That was the name of the Martian. Jean.
Jean. Yes, it was.
Yeah, I know.
Yep. It's also Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek. Okay.
Got a blast.
Shortly after beginning, Diderot came up with a much more ambitious goal than a mere translation. He wanted instead to create a comprehensive work that would include the most up-to-date knowledge on the science, arts, and crafts. To this end, he enlisted several of the best thinkers of the era, many of whom were well-known philosophers, or Philosophes, to write new articles from the Encyclopedie, which we call the Encyclopedia. He also wanted to make the work accessible to a wide audience rather than just for scholars. So although Diderot and d'Alembert ended up writing the majority of the articles, contributions also came from many noted figures, especially Voltaire, as well as Rousseau and Montesquieu. By the time the encyclopedia finally reached completion, it contained nearly 72,000 articles, accompanied by numerous illustrations. The work was as a whole represented an outstanding example of the Enlightenment thought. It praised science while also questioning religion, social institutions, the legal system, and even more. As a result, the Catholic Church viewed it as undermining its authority and placed the encyclopedia on its index of forbidden works. Nevertheless, it was widely read, with people often obtaining cheaper reprint editions, and these were sometimes published in Switzerland away from the Catholic Church. Herbert, in early 1600, the philosophy of Deism took the technique of rational analysis and applied it to religion, coming up with the conclusions that were not to the liking of many of the followers of Catholicism, Christianity. They didn't agree with it. Deists firmly believed in God, but rejected organized religion. Rather than looking to the church or the supernatural for moral guidance, deists believed that morality could be achieved by following reason. Even though deism affirmed the existence of God, it discarded virtually all the church traditions and practices as irrational or unnecessary, a fact which led many critics to dislike deists, called them anti-Christians, or even to portray them as atheists, even though they believed that there was a God. Now, Enlightenment philosophy emphasized experience and reason, while the church asked worshippers to accept its principles on faith, so a conflict here was inevitable. Deists viewed God as the great watchmaker whose creation, the universe, operated as smoothly as the fine Swiss watch. The task, as Enlightenment thinkers envisioned it, was to try to discover the principles that governed the functioning of this so-called watch. Deism thus centered around a belief in a God who operated according to reason and whose existence could be seen in the natural order and the logic of all that he created. Thomas Paine, who was famous primarily for writing a pamphlet known as Common Sense, we've talked about him during the American Revolution, was also a key theorist in deism. In his essay Of the Religion of Deism Compared with the Christian Religion, Paine asserted that there is a happiness in deism, when rightly understood, that is not to be found in any other system of religion, because deism did not force its followers to stifle reason in order to accept its tenets, is basically what Thomas Paine wanted them to believe. He said it was that your ability to have your own thoughts is what makes deism such a great thing. Now, Thomas Hobbes. Englishman Thomas Hobbes was one of the first thinkers to apply rational analysis to the study of government. In his famous work, Leviathan, Hobbes attacked the notion of a divine right of kings, which held that monarchs ruled because they had been appointed by God. Instead, he believed that a ruler derived sovereignty from the implicit consent of the people, governed by the people. Not surprisingly, this radical concept met with near universal disdain. Although it seemed to many that Hobbes was attacking monarchy, in reality, he favored having strong, authoritarian rulers because of conclusions he drew about human nature. Hobbes somewhat pessimistically believed that people were driven by their passions, and that only a powerful ruler could keep society from degrading into conflict and chaos. Without a monarch to exercise control, Hobbes wrote that people's lives would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutal, and short. Basically, he didn't like the idea of being an anarchist. He said there needs to be a strong ruler, but he didn't believe in divine right, that God gave you power to be a king and pass it on. Let's talk about John Locke. This guy is very important for the American Revolution. The first thing we need to know on him: he was another English theorist. He disagreed with the notion of divine right. However, he was very different than Hobbes. Locke's position in the past, before people formed societies, they lived in a state of nature. He believed that all men were equal in the state of nature because they were creatures of the same species and rank, with the same advantages and the same faculties. The second thing, John Locke also had an interest in how humans learn. In his essay concerning human understanding, he argued that the mind of a newborn baby was a tabula rasa, a blank slate, which, and depending on the environment and the experiences and what they did, that created the brain of that child and how they were going to think. In contrast, you could think of Aristotle, who believed that you had the knowledge in you already, it's just what you did throughout your life allowed that knowledge to come out. This was saying children are a blank slate. They come with an operating system but no programs installed, and you have to do that for them. Let's talk a little more about John Locke. In his two treatises of government, Locke attacked the divine right of kings and authoritarian government. He promoted a constitutional monarchy that derived its power from the law and from the consent of the people. Once again, we get that consent of the people. Very important to keep that in mind. He also believed that the government's primary responsibility was to protect individual property. He wrote that the great and chief end, therefore, of men uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property, to which in the state of nature there are many things wanting. The right to life, liberty, and your property, basically. Locke believed that in the state of nature, individuals had natural rights, which he referred to as all the rights and privileges of the law of nature. Locke claimed that one such right was to defend one's property. Basically, he said that you have the right to defend your life, your liberty, and your estate against the injuries and attempts of other men. Locke built on this assumption, suggesting that if any ruler or government violated these natural rights, the people would have the right to change the government by force if necessary. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So this guy is similar to Locke. Rousseau also used the concept of a state of nature to draw conclusions about society and governments altogether. Rousseau is probably the best known for his idea of the social compact. So if you're getting anything out of this slide, you need to write down social compact, which he outlined in his book, The Social Contract. Locke had viewed societies as having been created through mutual consent of all the members working together, but Rousseau went a step further, claiming that instead of mere consent, individuals form a society entered into a social compact with one another. The social compact balanced benefits with obligations. Those who entered into it would receive mutual protection and defense, along with assistance in overcoming obstacles that they could not conquer individually. In return, the social compact obligated the members of society to subordinate their natural liberties. We think of natural liberties, their freedom enjoyed by individuals in the state of nature, to the supreme direction of the general will. Thomas Paine continued to write on this as well. In allowing us to have a government, we obviously back down on some of the personal rights that we have, but it's there because it's a give and take. We, rather than fighting in a military, we have to pay taxes so that someone fights for us. We all pay those taxes collectively. We kind of vote on where they go, but we give up the right of deciding exactly where every single penny is spent by giving up the right to certain protections. Baron de Montesquieu. He was a French nobleman whose primary contributions to the Enlightenment political thought came in his 1748 Treatise of the Spirit of Law. So years before writing the treatise, Montesquieu had visited several European countries, carefully observing the workings of each nation's government. So he went from government to government. And in his book, The Spirit of Law, he laid out a comparative study of the different types of government and then put forth his own view on what government should be. So here's what he said. Montesquieu identified three sorts of government and their powers. You had legislative, executive, which is in respect to the things depending on the law of nations, and executive in regards to those things that depend on civil law. So you had legislative and two different types of executive powers. You notice those names also coincide with two of the branches of government in our country. So Montesquieu believed that if one person or a group of people held any two or all three of these powers, it would result in tyrannical law, executed in tyrannical manner. It would say if one person became in charge of all of these sections of our government, then we would have a tyrant, we would have a dictator. His ideas here prove that the basis for the doctrine used and the understanding of separation of powers. It's what our government is based on, which significantly influenced the whole creation of the United States Constitution. Montesquieu did not believe that democracy was the best form of government, however. Instead, he favored a constitutional monarchy based on the British model. He greatly admired Britain's government because he felt that Parliament, the King, and the courts worked separately and efficiently, since each could limit the power of the other. This idea of the different branches of government, each preventing the other from obtaining too much power, later led to the checks and balances that you see in the U.S. Constitution. And this will be the last thing we talk about, women in the Enlightenment. One of the offshoots of the Enlightenment philosophy was a change in the view of the role of women in society. Enlightenment thinkers held reason supreme and valued education as the best way to develop any person. They also viewed education as crucial for moral development and for society to function as a whole. Many thinkers, therefore, advocated education for women. However, they differed on the specific things that they believed women should be taught, and most male thinkers did not extend their arguments to advocate full equality at all. They just thought they needed to be educated. So, not surprisingly, some women disagreed with this position and wrote some very important works to advocate on their rights. So, Mary Wollstonecraft, this person right here, during the French Revolution, the National Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The document drew equally upon Enlightenment ideas and current events at the time to make statements both about political rights, about abuses which people had suffered under King Louis XVI. And in 1792, Mary Wollstonecraft, a teacher and writer from Great Britain, composed a vindication of the rights of women. Wollstonecraft had been living in Paris during the French Revolution and knew many of its leaders. The publication of the Declaration prompted her to outline her philosophies on the inadequacy ooh, that word got me there. inequalities that existed between the sexes. She was disheartened by the fact that in spite of their belief in equality, the leaders of the revolution didn't extend their equality to women. Even though they were mad, they were bad enough to kill and execute people over this, they said, all right, now we've got our equality, women don't need it. And she saw this as hypocritical and hoped that her work would convince the French leaders, okay, we're talking especially Talleyrand, that's who she dedicated her book to, wanted them to recognize that women had the same natural rights and intellectual capacity as men. So, did she get that? Wollstonecraft believed that women were kept in ignorance. She said, under the species name of innocence. She referred here to a common argument of the time which held that women should not be educated because it would ruin their natural innocence and have a detriment effect on their character. It would make them basically evil because they don't need to be exposed to all the bad that men are exposed to. She felt that denying education to women would deprive them of the tools they needed to properly exercise their reason. In the first chapter of her book, Wollstonecraft proclaimed it is time to effect a revolution in female manners, time to restore to them their lost dignity and make them as a part of the human species, labor by reforming themselves to reform the world. Many regard a vindication of the rights of women as marking the beginning of the modern women's movement for personal rights or women's rights. This, I'm going to stop here. She did not completely change the world immediately, but what she started here started a change that has continued to grow even to today. And I will finish the rest of the slides on the next couple videos. Thank you.